go.
Hi, my name is Jake Molina, and this is the Fellowship at Central Florida. And we're going to open up with some questions, guys. And we have a question over here.
So what's the difference between exegesis and eisegesis?
Okay, so this is a really good question because this is something I learned while in college. So actually, I could use what I learned in college in real life. This is awesome. But basically, let me just give you the definition straight up. And a lot of people are like, what's exegesis? I don't get that. I'm like, what are they talking about? And so here, let me just give you guys a really quick overview. Here we go. Okay, so exegesis is a critical explanation or interpretation of a text or scripture, and eisegesis is a personal explanation of a text, especially referring to the Bible. So the reason why that's important is a lot of people will interpret text, and a lot of people have interpreted the Bible actually falsely throughout time. And it says in 2 Peter, let me see, 2 Peter, if I can get to it real quick. If I can find 2 Peter. It's 2 Peter 3, I think. Just make sure I know it. It's going to be, let me shoot, 2 Peter 3, 15 through 17. Okay, and basically it says that there's people who actually have heard of what Paul is speaking and actually have they have twisted the scriptures. So throughout history and throughout Christianity, people actually have taken the scriptures and twisted them into what they want them to be. And so as Christians, we need to understand the scriptures for what they really are. We can't just take a verse and say, well, this is what I think it is, and not do your homework on the scripture. You can't just go, oh yeah, I think this is what the verse says. What exegesis is, and this is what I learned in college, is basically taking the scripture for what it is and what the writer was trying to say to the people of that time period, and understanding the background, the culture of the time period, and what it meant to the people he was speaking to. So we have to understand that. If we don't understand that, then basically we can do what we want with the scriptures and make it whatever we want to believe we want it to be. And eisegesis is when you take that when you receive when you understand the background, when you understand the culture, when you understand the concept that the text is really trying to show you, the scriptures are really trying to show you, that's when you take eisegesis and pull out what your interpretation or how the verse applies to you. So the thing is, though, there's some scriptures that it's really a no-brainer. It's like that it's literally universal throughout every scripture. Everything Jesus said is a pretty much universal, and it's like, wow. But then when Paul speaks, sometimes it's like, what? Like, what does that mean by that? So, like, a lot of times people took Paul's words out of context and changed it to believe whatever they want to believe, and people still do that today. So we have to actually take it and understand it for what it really is, rather than just believing what we want to believe. So that's exegesis and eisegesis. Anybody want to know? It's basically the interpretation of Scripture, how you interpret Scripture, and understanding Scripture in two different ways. So anyway, oh yeah. You must do your exegesis always before you do eisegesis. Remember that. I think that okay, so Gabe said, do you think there's a right and a wrong between exegesis and eisegesis? And the problem is that if you just take the scripture and read it at face value, and instead of really understanding what it's trying to say, and just kind of take from it, and then you're going to be wrong in a sense. You're going to not do the scripture justice if you don't understand the concept of why it was written. Like understanding the idea of the marriage feast and what does it mean to be the bride of Christ. It's a representation of the Jewish marriage custom. If you don't understand the Jewish customs, then you basically will be like, oh, okay, we're the bride of Christ, so that means we're gonna like sleep with Jesus. So you'll completely take that out of context and not understand what the Scripture is really trying to show as the covenant, a covenant with God. And so I think that's where people take it out of context. Anything else? Anybody else wants to add?
So what does it mean when it says Scripture interprets Scripture and Scripture is up for private interpretation?
Okay, so that is a really good one. So basically, he's saying, Scripture interprets Scripture, and how what does that mean exactly? And basically, that means that if you're reading one verse and you're like, well, this is what it means. But the thing is, though, if you say, oh, well, this is what it means, but what you're saying doesn't line up with other scriptures, then basically you have falsely interpreted the Scripture. Does that make sense? So you basically have taken your own idea and turned that into what you believe to be true, rather than taking the Scripture for what it's really trying to say. And so the Scriptures itself back each other up, and people always say, oh, well, the Scriptures contradict each other. And that's not true at all. The reason why people believe that Scriptures contradict each other is because they don't understand the context and what they're really trying to say. And they don't understand the background and the history and the culture of what the writer was saying at that time period. So therefore, when they're reading it at face value, they're like, oh, well, that contradicts with this verse. Well, when you really look at it, you realize that both of those verses complement each other and actually help each other out. And is there any other thing anyone wants to add?